Okay, hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back. This is Blown Speakers. I'm getting an echo somehow. Okay, this is Blown Speakers, episode 33. My name is Dave Hoenigman. And we are welcoming back Bela Koe-Krompecher, who you may remember from episode 11, I believe, when we talked about Guided by Voices. Bela, welcome back.
Yeah, thanks for having me, David. I appreciate it, and especially all the way from Japan. Impressive.
Yeah. Yeah. Gotta keep the Ohio alive.
Or maybe it's all the way from Columbus, right?
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, or as we were talking off camera. So today we're going to talk about. Wait, let me pause it. Okay. Yeah. So today we're going to talk about Columbus, Ohio, underground legend Jim Shepard's band V3 and their album Photograph Burns that was released in 1996. So this was my entry point to V3 and Jim Shepard's music, right? So yeah, as I mentioned, so in 96, I was living in Cleveland. I think I would have read about Jim in maybe the Cleveland Free Times, kind of art magazine. And yeah, my guess is they probably hyped this album a bit because it was a major label. And yeah, luckily I found it and I bought it. And yeah, I became an instant fan. But I mean, I get the feeling that, so of course you, Bela, you know Jim and would have been a long time fan of his work. So I always got the feeling that he had this enormous back catalog that I didn't know much about, or it was hard to get. So I had this one. And then when I was living in Chicago, I found a Vertical Slit album. So I have two of his albums. But is it true that there's actually tons of old Jim Shepard stuff that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. When you paused it, I had just got a friend of mine just returned. I have actually 2 Jim Shepard tapes.
Wow.
He had given me. This one is an old age, no age one that Mike Rep put out. And then this one is The Evil Twin, which is on Iron Press, which was his label. So yeah, he had cassettes. There's the was it Underneath the Lava Lamp? Is that what that's called? I'm so bad with names. And then there was a vertical. There's the Vertical Slit Live. And there was Negotiate Nothing, which is my favorite V3 record. And that only came out on CD. Now, maybe there's been like official bootlegs, I guess. So I don't know if Negotiate Nothing was one of those. And there's that Ever Never one. I actually had a cassette too somewhere. I'm looking, I have a big stack of cassettes over there. I think some other unreleased stuff from him. So what's interesting is well, yeah. So just I'll get to that story in a little bit. But yeah, he recorded a lot. His son Gabe probably has most of those recordings, but I know he also sent stuff to other people. I think Mike Rep probably has some. Him and Mike recorded all. I mean, they were buddies. So Mike probably has some. I don't know if Ron House might, and Tom Lax, Silk Breeze probably has some stuff too. So I think it's because his son Gabe has kind of rights to everything. Stuff comes out, and he wants stuff to to be, if stuff is getting reissues, he really wants it to be archival and be presented nicely. So I think that's one reason why some stuff hasn't been reissued, and why it's kind of like there's a dearth of it. Although with the Ever Never thing that came out last year, Charles Cicerella, who did the tribute and some other stuff with Jim. Charles is actually up in Cleveland. I think he's got a ton of stuff, unreleased stuff by Jim. Like I don't have that much except for the cassettes. I have the live record. I've got the Ever Never. I've got Negotiate Nothing, I got a bunch of singles,
Well, since you've heard a lot more of the music than I have, how would you, for the uninitiated that don't know anything about how he sounds, how would you describe him?
Well, I've always thought that for me, he always had a kind of Joy Division sound, even like when his voice is very somewhat Ian Curtisy. I don't think people always make that connection, but for me, but he also, he was different too, because he made a lot of sound collages.
Yeah.
So in Columbus, and he was originally from Florida, he was really one of the first people to put out his own music. So it's very DIY, and I would not classify him with Mike Rep in the way that Mike Rep and the Quotas really put out one of the first punk records on a 7-inch. Jim was doing stuff as well, but it was much more experimental. So I think there's a post-punk kind of vibe to his music, but it's punk in the way Sonic Youth is punk. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I always get, I always think, especially with some of this, and his music is, like I said, it's kind of all over the place with the sound collages and some of the more distortion-y stuff. There's not really hooks there. There's a lot of spoken word poetry, but like when he wrote songs, they were catchy as hell, which I think you really get from Photograph Burns. I think is that one on Wabana, though, the one on, or is that Spirit of War? It's the same people.
Oh, you mean the record label? This is American Recordings, right? Onion.
No, the other one, the cardboard
one. I'm sorry. Spirit of War. Spirit of War,
yeah. Because I think that one's a little more experimental, noisy.
Yeah. This is kind of sound collage is a good way to describe it. Yeah, very fragmented, right?
Yeah.
So this where Photograph Burns is more feels like a structured record. To a degree. Yeah. When did he start recording stuff or putting stuff out?
I'm guessing. So there's a really good interview with him in Forced Exposure, which, hold on real quick. I actually might have it, right? Do I have it here? This is. So I just got all this stuff returned about 2 weeks ago from the publisher who did the Jim Shepard comic. Was unpacking stuff, and he's like, I got all that stuff I don't know, the comic's like 5 years old or something, but he just returned all the stuff for the comic. So I believe, yeah. So there's a really good history, a vertical slit in this old Forced Exposure.
Okay. Wow.
So I can try to scan this to you. But I think Jim started recording and putting cassettes out 76, 77.
Wow.
Okay. It could have even been 75.
Okay. So he was very, very young at that time, right?
Well,
20, early 20s?
He was in his 20s, so he was about 10 years older than me, I think.
Okay.
He was, I mean, I'm 52, so in 77, I was 9. So, yeah, I mean, he must have been young, but he was, you know, it was weird. Those guys in Columbus, when I say those guys, so he was really good friends with Don Hallen, who was in the Basshole and Gibson Brothers, and Ron House, who was in Thomas Jefferson's Slave Apartments and Great Plains, and Mike Rep, who's Mike Rep in the Quotas, who recorded a lot of Jim stuff with and Mike he recorded Got It by Voices, and so those guys were about 10 years older than me. In the scene I was in, which was the same scene, Next Generation. So there was V3 and Great Plains and Scrawl, and to some extent Guided by Voices, like Ass Ponies from Cincinnati. There was that. They were all older. And then there was us. So he always, I mean, I think he died when he was 40. But he seems so much older, if that makes sense. Like when you're 20 and somebody's 30, or you're 23 and somebody's 33 or 35, you're like, fuck, that's old.
Wait, when did he move? So I didn't know until I think reading your blog that he was from Florida. I thought
he was from Florida.
So when did he move to Columbus?
I think he moved in the early to mid 70s, and then I think he went back and forth quite a bit. I think he would, like, at least in the 70s, I think he would I think he went back several times. I could be incorrect, but I think he was you know, he was a blue collar guy, you know.
I get that definitely from his.
Yeah, he was definitely like a blue collar guy who really, I mean, he loved punk rock, but he also loved like Bowie, and I'm pretty sure he liked Frank Zappa. So he liked a lot of arty stuff. Eno, he definitely liked Eno, Roxy Music. So he had interesting tastes. Obviously, Lou Reed, Velvet Underground. So, and I think he was, you know, pretty sure, you know, he liked Gang of Four and all of that stuff that came out. I mean, that English post-punk stuff really was kind of a game changer for a lot of people, because it really added some smarts to punk rock. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so I think Jim, where he was really drawn to that. It was interesting. He once gave me a mixtape of his, and I keep looking over here. I don't know where. Sorry about that. Sorry. He once gave me a mixtape of his like 20 favorite punk rock songs. I shouldn't say singles. There were 2 Jim Shepard songs.
Oh, really?
So he was interesting because even at the record store, because I worked at Used Kids, he came in quite a bit, but it was mostly just to talk about his music.
Oh, really?
Or something. So he was really involved in his art. So yeah. So he started, and I think in his music, you definitely hear that sort of isolation from probably going back and forth from Florida. I don't know what his family life was like. I can only imagine now in retrospect, especially me being a social worker, I could probably read the tea leaves pretty well. But even amongst our scene, he was always there. He was always very quiet.
You mean
if that makes
quiet off?
He was
off stage,
yeah.
I guess.
Yeah, he was not a gregarious person, which you can probably gather from. Although he was really funny. Like he would say something. Like we would go for beers after work, and he would say something, and it was really deadpan and dry. And he would read poetry. There was Larry's, the bar where a lot of us hung out at, had a poetry night, and so he was there every Monday, reading his poetry or listening to people. He was very supportive of that community.
I'm kind of surprised to hear he's quiet because like just on Photograph Burns, I think there's a lot of moments where other bands would have just kind of let the music ride for a bit, but he'll be like a song will kind of be winding down and he'll just start talking over it and say a bunch of cool stuff. And you're like, wow, like a lot of bands, that would have just been like the outro, like I had this idea that he always wanted to, he struck me as talkative based on.
He was not a talkative. No, he wasn't very talkative.
Okay.
He was dark. He was not dark in like a gothy way, but like I said, in hindsight, I think there was a lot of sadness within him. But also, he was an artist, and he was well read. I remember he really liked the Beats. He was a big fan of William Burroughs. I think that comes across, like especially Burroughs. You hear his sound collages and even the spoken word stuff. Big science fiction fan, which comes across. And V3, before that last incarnation with Sam Brown and Leland Kane, when Nudge Squidfish was in it, they were a sight to see. And I can't remember the other guy's name. Was it Rudy? No, Rudy is Squid. I can't remember. But they were a sight to see. And Squid is a pretty interesting guy, but a lot of psychedelics, and they were in very, very intense and very great live. It's interesting too that their approach to music live, they were a rock band. There was nothing really artsy about them. They just got up there and they were a trio and they fucking rocked. Whereas when you listen to some of their records, it doesn't come across that way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, they maybe more experimental on record than they are live.
And I think that there's like this generational aspect to that where even the art punk bands, the post-punk bands of the 70s and early 80s grew up listening. I mean, they didn't just listen to like the Velvet Underground, but they grew up like listening to Grand Funk and FM radio. And so there's always, at least with the scene where I was and where I witnessed that, there was always an appreciation of that rock portion of it, which I know we've talked about Guided by Voices before, which I think is some ways the invisible thread of GBV and their sort of rock aesthetic. Does that make sense? Like no irony in liking Grand Funk or or the Raspberries, or I'm thinking FM radio, like even Jethro Tull, right? That there was an appreciation of classic early freeform FM radio, even Funkadelic, especially Funkadelic.
So that band with Squidfish, was that a trio, or how many? So when
I think it was a trio. I'm trying to remember. I'm pretty sure it was a trio. Maybe not on record, but live. So it was Squid and I can't think of the other guy's name, the drummer, and Jim. Yeah.
Is he would that drummer have played it? Did he play on Photograph Burns? There were three different drummers on Photograph Burns.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So actually, I have my copy here. I should see. So when he got signed, or right before he got signed to Onion, he got Sam Brown, who was the drummer for the New Bomb Turks and Gaunt, to play drums, and it really has that tighter rock sound. I think that influences more Sam.
Okay.
Because Sam, at his heart, is a rock drummer. So he also drums for Divine Fits and Operators. So he really tightened that sound up. And then Leland Kane, Leland is from Cleveland, actually. So Sam drums. I don't know who the other guy is. David McCullough. Yeah. So
I have that listed or on a slide, but
no. So Rudy is. So yeah, I was right. Rudy was his name. Was the original drummer, I think, on V3. So it was Rudy, Squid, and Nudge, Squidfish, and Jim.
So when I put that piece together, I sent you the link right about 10 years ago. I wanted to do it was called Remembering Jim Shepard. I did just a little internet article, and I talked to Charles Cicerella, Ron House, Don Howland, Mike Rep, and Nudge Squidfish. And
so you got them all.
Yeah. And I forget how it started, but they all introduced me to each other, and they all wrote a bit about it, and I just kind of put it together. But Nudge Squidfish sent me like 40 or 50 pages of writing that I guess he was thinking about writing a book about Jim Shepard. Have you ever read that?
No, I've never read it.
Yeah, it's I should send it to. I mean, I still have the file. It's interesting.
I'd love to read it. He's an interesting guy. Nudges, like I saw, because I don't drink, and I saw him. This was pre-COVID. I saw him probably like 2 years ago at a show, and he was like, he's like, Bela, I quit drinking. And I was like, you really? Because I think he had a heart attack, and I was like, that's great. That's fantastic. He's super interesting. He's fun guy, like big UFO conspiracy.
I knew that.
That come across. Like if you follow his Instagram or whatever it is, it's like all UFOs. So he was like, yeah, I quit. It's like, that's great. He goes, I had a heart thing. I just needed to stop. He goes, man, but I'm still doing a lot of acid.
Acid? Oh my God. So wait, so he's like close to 60, or?
Oh yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Wow. I didn't realize people did that at that age.
Beating Tube Records, the Byron Coley, they put out a couple of his records, Squid's records, and Columbus Discount. So at one point, Squid moved to Nashville to be a songwriter, and back then, if you wanted to be a songwriter, you would make demos. You would have these demos of songs you wanted to sell, and I think he might even had a private press record, and then Columbus Discount Records actually printed it up, and it was it's not in print anymore, but so like if you go to Discogs, you could probably get it.
So I'm curious. All right, so if Jim starts, is doing all these kind of home recordings and experimental stuff, at what point? Because I think by the time I would have read about him, in '96, and certainly by the time Photograph Burns come out, he was, like Thurston Moore was a fan of his, and David Bowie somehow was a fan of his. How did that happen?
Well, Thurston was, I mean, that's the scene he came out of.
Mm-hmm.
So
like
Thurston,
no wave type mentality, you think?
yeah, but just the underground scene. So he came out of like a record store scene and experimental music and DIY music. I think that's the easiest way of putting it. And so that is a very small world. And back then it was even smaller. So you had these scenes. I think I talk about it in my blog, and it might be in my book. I'm not sure. Where you had these scenes that were really connected through fanzines and college radio and record stores, in the clubs that people played. So everyone kind of knew everybody. So, you know, Tom Lax was in Philly. He's originally from Ohio. And so the folks in Sonic Youth, I remember when they came in, they played Columbus a lot. And Thurston came into the record store, and like when they played, he would come in and hang out. He was friends with Ron House. And I was like, wow, that's Thurston Moore. But it's, you know, the guys, you know, Ira and James and Georgia from Yellow Tango, like everyone just knew each other. And so I think that's how how Thurston became aware of Jim, just through that sort of scene, because, you know, like everybody read Forced Exposure. So there's no doubt that, you know, when this came out, that Thurston would have already been aware of him. And, you know, I'm sure Gerard Cosloy was, I'm positive he was fans of Jim way back when he was doing Homestead. So everybody knew each other. Mm. And where I came in, like my generation was on the tail end of that. So that stuff was already, Bowie, I'm not sure. I think, I want to say with Bowie that when Iggy Pop played the Newport here in town, that Bowie was playing keyboards. And I could be wrong here, but I'm guessing somehow, I'm sure Jim was at that show, that he may have chanced upon Bowie. They may have gone to Larry's and he slipped him a tape. That's what I'm guessing.
Well, I think it was Ron House said that, so Jim opened for John Cale at one point?
Yeah, that was at Stash's.
Okay. That was John Cale solo and just...
Solo, yeah, I was at that show. Okay. I forgot about it.
Wow. Yeah, Ron House...
Really short set, by the way. Cale played like 38 minutes.
Oh, really? Yeah, I actually saw him a couple of years ago in Tokyo. It was rather short, but yeah, intense though. Yeah, according to Ron House, somehow it was kind of through John Cale, and John Cale turned on David Bowie. But I mean, it also...
yeah.
What you're saying also makes sense too. Yeah, that, I mean, I guess it just kind of fascinates me that, you know, a guy, you know, just kind of a grouchy guy in Columbus making experimental music could get the ear of David Bowie.
Well, Jim was a pretty good self-promoter. I mean, he wanted his music heard, you know. Like I said, you know, when he gave me that tape of his 20 favorite punk songs, and there were 2 of his on it. So he was, you know, he wanted people to hear his music, you know, and there's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. But he was an introvert, so I think it was very difficult for him as well too. He wasn't, and he was a blue collar guy. Like, we were all working in record stores or libraries or bookstores or whatever, and he was out schlepping away, you know, doing whatever it is. You know, I think he switched jobs a lot. For a long time, he was a jukebox repairman.
I
So
did, yeah.
he actually, one of my favorite 45s I have is this George Jones Yabba Dabba Doo, which is a song he somehow in the song George Jones ends up drinking, like his wife leaves him and he ends up drinking out of a Fred Flintstone decanter, and by it's an Elvis decanter and a Fred Flintstone jar, and by the end of the song they're all talking. So Jim got me the promo only version of that, which is a picture sleeve of George, Fred, and Elvis. So I mean, he was sweet because he was like, "Hey, I've got this George Jones, and I know you're a fan. This promo only." So he would go to all the bars, all the dive bars, and have to fix their machines and. And I now that I think about it, I mean, probably a lot of that. I mean, his work might have even been impacted because of CDs, because he did record jukebox.
Shall we? Oh. Okay, well, yeah, I wanted to play a track off Photograph Burns. This is the opening track, American Face. I think it's an intense opening track. All right, well, let's give it a spin, then we'll. Just to give people an idea. Yeah, but I mean, I find him more, I mean, that song sounds kind of punky, right? But I find him like more wordy than other punk vocalists, right? Like I feel like he's always, speaking over everything, in a very great way,
Yeah. I mean, as I was listening, I was like, I think you really hear that sort of Ian Curtis. But he's got a snarl too, right? I mean, he's.
And I feel like the tone of it to me feels like when you say Ian Curtis, I'm like, I see that. But he's more wordy than Ian Curtis, right? Like
yeah. So because I think his background is poetry. I mean, I think Jim's, really, I mentioned William Burroughs, but I think that's what he really liked. And I'm pretty sure he was a big fan of like Zappa and Beefheart. Okay. That I don't think that's talked about enough when a lot of those folks who were making some pretty angular music. You know, just imagine when you're, I mean, like I said, Jim was in his mid to late 30s when he made that record. But when you think about high school, like I know what I was looking for in the 80s with when I was in high school, other types of music. The fact that if somebody could listen, like if even, I said that a lot of those guys really liked a lot of FM freeform radio, but just imagine, wow, then you discover Captain Beefheart, and you discover Zappa, and you discover Eno and Roxy Music and Hampton Grease Band.
He was a Para Ubu fan too, right?
Yeah. So exactly. So imagine you're coming up with all of that, being an outsider where music is really your shelter, and then punk hits, and then all that English punk, like I mentioned, Gang of Four and Joy Division and All Pairs, all that stuff comes out, and Wire. So that's just got to be like, oh wow, like this is kind of but he does bring a very sort of American Midwestern hard hat mentality to that.
Yeah, that's what I think I connected with was, immediately was the voice. I mean, not like his physical voice, but more like his, which I also like, but yeah, just his point of view and how he was looking at things and commenting on things. It to me, it felt like just the downtrodden, blue collar people, like just given this angry voice, like it wasn't a cute like country thing. It was actually like this angry, pissed off voice, and just very sharp and clear. And I just, even the liner notes. Do you remember the liner notes on Photograph Burns? There's a story about a one-armed guy who comes to the concert. So it's something. So this one-armed guy shows up at a V3 concert, and he's like, pumping his fist, and he knows all the words. And then Jim, who I guess is the narrator of this little piece, is I think he's working in a restaurant, and someone puts on some horrible music, and the one-armed guy comes in and shoots the radio, and then Jim and the one-armed guy go out drinking. But the last line of it is my favorite. He says, I just so fell in love with everything. The the artwork and the music and the liner notes. Okay, I quit the lame ass buck-an-hour gig, and me and the one-armed guy went out and drank so much we had to take turns carrying each other back to wherever we ended up. Like, to me, that just that level of fuck everything. He's always saying something about his wage slave job and everything. He worked a lot of, I'm sure he worked jobs as a dishwasher and probably a janitor and a bar back and all of that sort of stuff. He was blue collar. I think what I wrote about him, which for me, it rings very true while I wrote it. So is this idea like, his hair was always greasy, but it looked like he bought his shaving kit at the liquor store. And that was him. And he was, he was a day drinker. Like I would go up to Larry's or walk to get lunch, and I would see Jim, like he got on his lunch break, he would stop and get a drink. So I'm not sure what his life was like in Florida. And, Photograph Burns is a pretty interesting record to be put out by a major label. Yeah. It was, it was surprising, what the Onion put out that and the Thomas Jefferson Slave Apartments record basically around the same time.
So it was also interesting from the point of view is that, you know, Jim was his own person. He wasn't like a hander, you know, he was part of the scene, but he was still very much an outsider within it. You know, he wouldn't be in the middle of the bar dancing around. He was at the end of the bar. If that makes sense.
That's even a track on here, End of the Bar. Track 9.
In fact, the last time I saw him was at there was a dive bar here called Waltz. Was he at Waltz? No, now it's called Bourbon Street. I think it was called Whiskey Flats then. And he was dark. He was in a dark place. And he was like drinking against, like, there was like a video poker machine. And I was trying to talk to him. And my friend Tom Shannon, who's in the Cheater Flicks, was talking. He was like, man, talk to Jim. He's not doing well. And he was just kind of head down, and he was dead like 4 days later.
So that was October 98, I think, right? When he
it was weird too, because he was I'm trying to think if I have that CD here. Mike Rep put out a limited edition CD of, maybe it's is it Motorcycle Movie? Is that what it's called? Of some of those last songs. And okay. It was weird because he was recording with Jenny May, which was kind of a strange match.
Oh yeah.
But they were both barflies. They hung out a lot, and she plays on that last record. But I remember that week, the next day, Jenny called me. He's like, I've been recording with Jim, and he's not doing well. There's just something off about him.
Wow.
Which was coming from her as somebody who was off. You know, and then, you know, I remember going to the record store, and Ron was like, Jim died. He hung himself. So,
wow.
Which, you know, that was pretty impactful for us. So,
yeah. Everybody was shocked, I guess. Or, well, you're saying people were concerned before it happened, but still,
people were concerned, but he was a tough guy to get to know. I don't know if anybody really knew him. I mean, I would think that Mike Rep was probably his best friend. I mean, I would think, or Squidfish or Squid. But Don and I mean, Don Howell was just up here a couple weeks ago. We chatted, and he talked about Jim, and he was like, Jim was one of the funniest guys I ever met, but I didn't really know him. You know. They made that Ego Summit record. I don't know if you have that.
I've heard it. Yeah. Yeah, because you even say you would spend a lot of time like next to him at the bar or whatever, and you still didn't feel like you knew him, right? Huh. No. But it's interesting because his music, you feel like he's bearing a lot of himself, you know, in his music. Like he's saying a lot that other people probably wouldn't say about themselves.
Well, yeah, I'm guessing he suffered a lot, you know, that comes out. And I don't know, like I said, I don't know his story growing up, but I mean, I can piece things together. But I think that's where a lot of artists come from, right? You know, people, it's easier to bear yourself in words or music than just to talk about it. I mean, you got to get that stuff out somehow.
Do you know why he moved to Columbus?
I'm guessing a woman.
Oh, really?
I don't know, but that would be probably a Ron or Mike question, but I'm guessing a woman. And he was involved like with that woman Roxanne, who's the mother of his son. Well, Gabe is in his 40 now, so.
Okay.
So yeah.
And so you said Gabe wants to kind of organize putting out like kind of a sort of nice archival box set type thing. Is that how he's envisioning it?
I don't know. I know he's doing something now, because I think he may be using some of the writing or artwork from the comic. But Jim had sent Ron Schneiderman, who was running Wabana. He had sent him 4 or 5 CDs of unreleased music about 4 or 5 months before he died.
Wow.
And so he was planning it, and he had put like a cryptic note of I'm sending you this because you'll know what to do with it. But that stuff is, from my understanding, has never been released. And I think Tom Lax has a similar story as well. And I think Tom writes about it in the Ever Never liner notes.
One of the guys that I know, I have this idea. One of the guys I talked to said something that it's kind of purposeful that Jim doesn't want like people to be able to come to his music from some easy path. Like he prefers like the idea that people having to find it in various sources and kind of assemble it themselves. And like, do you agree with that? Or
definitely. But I do think for a lot of people, artists, there's a total giving of yourself, but there's also a holding back. And there's that discovery of the search and of being a cult artist. So I think Jim, his music has so much integrity in it that I think he wanted to make money from his art, but it was pretty, he was totally committed to his art. That comes across. But I think if he could have made money off of it, of course he would have liked it. But I think there's that sort of barfly mentality, the underdog mentality of he was not and it comes across in his music, like he was very anti-commercial. So
okay, but see, I guess I see kind of a conflict, right? Because like you say, he wanted people to hear his music, right? But then, so when he was signed to American Recordings, Onion, what's the name of the A&R guy who also?
Johann.
Yeah. So
Johann Kugelberg. Yeah.
So that's the same guy who would have recruited Thomas Jefferson Slave Apartments. Right?
Yeah, and Johann initially worked at Matador. He worked at Matador, and then he went to go work for Rick Rubin.
Okay.
And
okay, but when V3 it was first decided that they were going to put out an album on Onion, was Jim happy?
I think he was happy. I think he bought a car. I don't think there was that much advance. I mean, Onion was a vanity label for Johann to run, and I think Rick Rubin gave him carte blanche to do whatever he wanted to do. So he only put 3 records out. He did the Stiffs and Slave Apartments and V3. And I don't think there was any hope or any expectations those records would sell a lot, but it was sort of an idea that, historically in the 60s and 70s and somewhat in the 80s, that major labels would put out experimental rock music or experimental jazz or whatever it was, right? Because it was vital, it was important. So I think Rick Rubin believed in that. And I do think there was definitely a dilemma of bands that signed to major label. But guess what? Unless you're Fugazi, especially in the 90s, you're not making money being on a small label necessarily. Does that make sense? I mean, you can make it work unless you're on a label like Matador's. But, even at that time in the 90s, Matador and some of the other labels were aligned with either Caroline or Atlantic, like Matadors was with Atlantic, and now they're with Beggars, that you really needed that bigger distribution, and you wanted to get played on. You weren't those bands weren't necessarily going to get played on radio, but they could get played on MTV. They could be in rotation like in the evening or whatever. So it was different, but there was this idea of major label is the devil, but you grow up. I mean, you grow up when you're a kid, and music is your getaway at that time. The only records you're buying in this early 70s are major label records. And it isn't until punk, and again, they were adults when punk broke, that sort of cascade of indie labels sort of come out, you know, Factory Records and Rough Trade and Homestead to, you know, as the next generation. That, you know, the next generation of that was actually, you know, Caroline and Sub Pop and Matador. But that is sort of like, you know, you grow up and I can just see like Jim is 15 years old and he gets the New York Dolls, right? Mind blowing. So there could be a conflict from the punk scene or the indie scene, and you're going to sign to a major label, but there's probably this kernel in you of like, fuck, I'm on a major label. I'm valid. My art is validated in some sense. Does that make, I don't know. And it's a different world now because people are not clamoring to sign to Warner Brothers.
And it's obvious he did exactly what he wanted on this album, right? And
yeah.
So even on a major label, he didn't spend much money on it, right? It was recorded in a basement for $50 a day, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure it was. There's a great Mudhoney documentary where they talk about they would, you know, they got whatever their signing bonus was, you know, $100,000 or $500,000 or however much they got. They don't name the number, but and then they go right back to Conrad Uno's studio and record it for like $2,000 and turn it, and then they keep all the money.
I mean, for certain,
you know, that's
kinds of music. That's
and like I said, I don't think Jim. Jim got a lot of money from Onion. You know?
Well, yeah, and I wasn't thinking about it in terms of money, but just opportunity, right? Like, I mean, would he have been excited? Like, I think there's something in that Squidfish writing about they went to play GBV's. What can I say? CBGB's in New York City, right? Oh, did I lose you? Okay, sorry for the tech trouble there. And I also couldn't say CBGB's for some reason. But yeah, I had this idea. Well, because if you look at like Guided by Voices, when they, you know, when there was a buzz about them, but then from my understanding, when it really took off is when they went to New York and they played like sellout shows and blew everyone's mind. And then they went off from there. So like, I would think at least some people would be thinking the same thing could happen with V3, right? Because I mean, I think this is a great album. They're a great live band. They're going up to New York City. Like maybe, you know, there might be.
They were a darker band. I mean, for us in Columbus, it was an interesting signing because Jim, he was not, you know. So like, you know, you see Pollard and he wants to drink with you and laugh and tell stories. And Jim wants to drink with you, but he's just kind of mumbling next to you. He's the friend that's kind of whispering in your ear. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And I think you get that. Yeah. I think you get that from his music. He's not hanging out after the show with people. Like he might hang out at the show, but it's not with people.
What does that mean?
He's drinking and
Okay.
and talking to a few people, but he's not in the middle of the crowd talking.
Okay. All
He's
right.
just that was Nat. So I was saying so that there is a single, I think it's Elevator to Hell. I'm not sure if that's the name of it. And part of that is recorded at CB's. And I'm thinking that show they played with the New Bomb Turks, because I think Eric Davidson sings, I'm going to say Sonic Reducer, but I know I'm wrong. So somebody's going to get mad about me about that. But I know Eric did sang with them. And they may have toured with Guided by Voices. I can't remember, but I don't think they did a lot of touring. You know, they played Columbus. They did a lot of shows. A lot of the shows I booked here, promoted here, they played a lot. In fact, I think like there's this. Yeah. So here it is. Here's one. Let me see that flyer.
Oh, wow. Nice.
Jerry too, that would be Jerry Wick solo.
Was it a good show?
Yeah, I mean, they were always pretty incredible live, you know, but they were, you know, their fans here were the people in the scene, you know, like the record store people.
Mm.
They weren't getting like frat guys to their shows.
Mm.
But and he was a little choosy who he played with. You know, they did, I remember the one show that was really like probably one of the best shows I've ever seen was they played with the X and Tom Cora and Guided by Voices. Guided by Voices opened up that show. So it was them and V3 and the X with Tom Cora. That was a fucking insane show. That was so good.
Huh. How long was like, because it gets confusing, right? So Vertical Slit and Phantom Limb and V3, like what was the lifespan of these bands? Or
so I want to say Vertical Slit morphed into V3 probably around 93.
Mm-hmm.
I'm guessing. And, you know, Roxanne was not in V3, but she was in Vertical Slit and maybe Phantom Limb. I'm not sure. That's like a Ron House question right there.
Mm.
And then, you know, V3 was much, and he did his solo stuff. Like he had the solo record on Thrill Jockey, which is almost all sound collages. I mean, that's a pretty, is that picking through the records with the stick, I think is the name of it.
And that's a good phrase for just trying to get your head around his music.
Yeah, so you never knew what you were going to get. I remember when I was going to put that 7-inch out that Spirit of War put out, and he gave it to me. And honestly, it's one of the only records that I ever said, no, I want something else. Because I was like, I don't want to put out a 7-inch of a live recording. I don't want that, because I knew he did so much home recording, and I was like, Jim, come on, can you give me something else? And so he gave me American Face and Son of Sam Donaldson.
Huh. Wow.
Which was, I mean, that is so, those are great songs, but that's me too. Like I like traditional sort of like verse chorus. I love melodies. And so, as I said earlier, you know, when he wrote those, and you really hear, it's like, you know, I think about Bristol Girl, like what a beautiful song. So for me, I always preferred that part of Jim Shepard than the more noisier stuff.
Me too, I would say. I mean, I guess that's why I chose, out of my 2 albums that I have, that's why I chose to talk about photo. I mean, I've connected with Photograph Burns more, even though I find the Vertical Slit one interesting. And there are some songs on here, but in Bristol Girl, that's Guided by Voices did a version of that, right?
Oh, I think they did. Yeah.
You know, when Guided by Voices came here to Tokyo in 2000 for Do the Collapse, I was able to talk to Bob afterwards, and yeah, I brought up Jim Shepard to him. Yeah, and he said,
he
"Oh yeah,
probably got a kick out of it."
Yeah, he said we did one of their songs, and at the moment he couldn't think of the song, but yeah, it was Bristol Girl.
And Jim named Vampire on Titus.
Yeah. That's so. What's the story exactly for our viewers?
I think he was hanging out at Bob's house, the clubhouse, or whatever they called it, and
the monument.
Bob lived on Titus.
The monument.
The monument. the Monument Club.
Okay.
So Bob lived on Titus Avenue in Dayton, and so Jim, Bob's a pretty excitable guy. He's a lot of fun, but he's like, he could be a life coach. He must have been an incredible teacher. So I think the story goes is that he was really excited to play Jim's songs, and they were, of course, at that time, like every fucking song Bob was writing was amazing. So he's like, oh, Jim, I'm going to play this one. I'm going to play this one. And Jim said, you're like a vampire on Titus mining songs, or sucking songs out of the earth or something like that. That's where that came from. So
that's cool. It's such a landmark album for them too. So it's great.
Yeah. So, and I don't know, now I think about it, Jimmy have recorded with them as well too. I mean, that's a good Bob question, because there was a lot of hanging out back then.
Was Jim, I mean, I guess trying to understand his personality more, was he a ladies' man? I have an idea he was a ladies' man.
God, I couldn't fairly answer that. I know he was in a long-term relationship, and he has a son, Gabe. There was a woman he was hanging out with around the time that he died. I cannot remember her name. I know she was pretty involved in drugs. I mean, I think some of us sort of thought maybe he was. That was like not my world. I mean, there was a lot of drugs going on back then, but the scene I was in, it was mostly alcohol. So, weed or whatever, but not dope or coke. So, or, pills. But I know I remember he was hanging out with her. Like, I think we all were pretty sure she was a heroin user. I'm guessing she's dead by now. But no, I mean, he was a loner, he was a loner in our world. He was an outsider, but not. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Well, because on this album, there's a song called Horse Kick, which is about a girl strung out on heroin. So I think I kind of assumed that he was also dabbling based on his lyrics, but you're not sure, I guess.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's a Ron question. None of us, when I say Ron and Mike, and I mean, there were drugs, absolutely. But like I said, we were pretty heavy drinkers. That like Ron and Mike and Jim, there were a lot of weed, like that was a constant. But and for myself, as somebody who's in recovery, I never saw that many drugs, although I know they were there, and we had friends that died from overdoses. But the opioid epidemic we have now was not. I mean, drugs were for heroin was for pretty hardcore people, and then like the whole Rolling Stones mythology. It wasn't like what it is now. So. He's got a song on Negotiate Nothing, Party at 15th and Summit, I think, where he sings about Arliss, who was a lesbian heroin addict, who was in the scene, who was part of his scene. And he talks about her shooting up in the back of her hand, I think. I think that's the song. Arliss, Arliss died tragically. She overdosed in a Taco Bell bathroom.
Wow.
What's interesting about her as well is Mark Eitzel wrote a song about her called Outside This Bar when Mark lived here and hung out with Arliss. So,
okay.
Just
Mark is from Columbus, or he just lived there for a while?
Yeah, he's from Columbus. His sister still lives here.
Wow.
So he comes to town every now and then.
Huh.
But he was in that scene with Jim. I'm sure he knew Jim. He was in a band called the Cowboys.
Okay.
So
yeah, I'd like to listen to more of his music. I don't know what would you recommend, Mark Etzel?
I really so all the American Music Club records are great. I really like the Ferryman record, the last one he had on Merge. God, that's a great record. And the 40-watt Silver Lining, which was on Reprise, that's one of my favorite records ever. That's a gorgeous, gorgeous record. So there's not one Mark Eitzel record that I would say you don't get.
Wow. I didn't realize he was a Columbus guy somehow. Cool. Let me. Yeah, like the reason I was asking about, whether or not there was a conflict, and I guess I'm curious about like Jim's attitude going into this album, which could have been an opportunity for like, perhaps a wider profile that, but this track 10 on the album, Star Artist, it seems like he already has this really kind of jaded attitude about success, right? He's talking about being a star artist as, being, the whole song is very snarling and sarcastic and mean-spirited, and he's just kind of mocking the whole idea of artistic success. So why would he have that attitude at that time?
So as we sort of were talking during the break, so I'm going to put my social work professor hat on here, because I work with substance abusers, and that's pretty much, I've worked with substance users who have severe mental illness for most of my social work career. So when substance users, which Jim was, there's a deep wound inside of them that usually stems really early into childhood, like way into childhood, the beginning of childhood for many people, where there's not that connection formed with the caregiver. And it could like be manifested by a divorce or whatever it is. And so that core part of them, there's a core part that basically says, I'm unlovable. That it's not a prefrontal cortex thought. It's not an intelligence thought. It's an emotional memory that is a driver of many people. All of us are driven somewhat by those old early emotions. And so there's this deep feeling that I am unlovable. But yet at the same time, I crave connection, and I crave as I say, the caregiver's affection, the nurturing. But when you give it to me, my core self says, I don't deserve this. I'm unlovable. So I push you away. Not to say that signing to a major label is the mother, it's the success. So many artists and many people who have substance abuse, one is they don't handle compliments very well. They don't handle gifts very well. They are very uncomfortable putting themselves out there. It's not an easy task for them to go and sell themselves, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
But you know, when you're an artist or a writer or whatever, or a movie maker, you want your art to be seen, but there's a doubt. So one way that people get over that is either apologizing for it beforehand. Oh, I don't think I'm going to give you this, but you probably won't like it, right? That's an example. And we all hear that because it gives me a way of an out. And there's a, you know, there can be some snarkiness to it. There could be whatever it is. And I preface this as somebody who is very much like that, in a very non-judgmental way, you know. And you know, like I have a book coming out, and it's very nerve-wracking for me to even tell people, right? But I have to do it because I want people to read my book, and I don't want the publisher to lose money, and whatever that is. But having to go and do that, I get it. It's uncomfortable. It's probably why my record label hasn't been that successful, because I'm uncomfortable doing that. So I think from where Jim came from, my guess is that deep wound, which is eventually manifested itself by him taking his own life. So I don't know if that's that's my social work hat.
I mean, I find that song kind of fascinating, but I think what you said, it's almost like he's covering his ass in a way, like he's you know, making a mockery of the situation, almost like, you know, I'm not really doing this sincerely. I'm just kind of half-assed sarcastically doing this.
It's safer.
It's
safer. It's I'm playing defense by playing offense.
Yeah. But he says it in such a kind of a powerful, you know, voice.
Yeah, I guess I want, you know, listeners to know, like, that's not a judgment that I'm saying. That's just, that is the schema that I believe that comes from. And for the scene that we were in, and I'm sure it's still that scene, is like, you're a bunch of, right? Like people that come from broken homes, or families that have substance abuse, or didn't quite fit in. Maybe they're queer, or gay, whatever it is. Like, you're moving outside of this into a community you feel welcome with, and to go back and desire that you want the recognition from that larger group is a very torn feeling. Because those motherfuckers made life hell. But I still yearn for that approval.
Yeah. So you
but there's that, like, well, there's that, like, fuck you. Like, truly for me, it's like, fuck you. I don't care if a lot of the people I went to high school with read my book or listen to the music I put out. Like, fuck you. But for some, you know, it would be, you know, I want that. I want people to hear the music or whatever it is. I'm probably talking too much now.
No. I think but that's exactly what I asked. Yeah. So, it's an interesting, fascinating conflict, right? And people are complex.
It makes great art.
Yeah.
It makes great art.
Yeah. You're allowed to want both things in a way, right? I mean, to have that authenticity you want with the people, you know, your true fans or the people close to you, and, you know, to step it up. I mean, he didn't need to be so hard on himself about wanting that, you know?
Yeah. And that was very much a thing of the time as well, too. You know, there's a whole, you know, selling out and major labels this and major labels that. But
the post Nirvana,
you want to make money. That's
right. The post Nirvana times, right? Getting the Butthole Surfers a top 40 hit and everything. So do you think, so you mentioned his suicide, you think it was related to his art? It wasn't like a personal thing? I mean, it somehow...
Well, I think it's all together, right? It's all a mixed ball. I mean, do I think that Jim committed suicide because his record didn't sell? No. I don't. I mean, I'm sure it was disappointing that, you know, they were dropped from Onion and or whatever that was. But it's like suicide, when people get to that point, it's a lot of drips into the sink. It's, you know, and there may be a giant drip at the end that causes it to overflow, but it's a lot of other drips that have piled up in there. So I don't know what, you know, as somebody who suffers from depression, it's not an easy thing to live with, you know, and really some big things have to happen for people to get to a point where they're going to, you know, address it in a healthy way. So to answer your question, I think it was a lot of different reasons rolled up into one big ball, that he just couldn't get out. He didn't feel there was a way out, except for the one he chose.
Yeah, so the album cover is certainly memorable, right? So and I guess I've always been curious about it, but I never really researched it until last night. And yeah, I found another photo from that session.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, George Diak, 1962. So this was for the Vancouver Sun. But the story is really interesting. So George Diak took one of the most dramatic Sun photos, a naked Doak Hobor woman in the Kootenays watching her house burn in June 1962. The Sons of Freedom Duke Hoban sect battled with the federal government and provincial government for decades over a variety of issues, such as whether their children should go to school. So these people were against their children going to school, right? And the government forced the children. The government forcefully removed the kids and put them in a residential school in New Denver. And in protest, some of the Freedomites torched their own homes. Like, so I guess this woman, they're this sect, or, I mean, have you heard of this before?
No, but yeah. You know what I'm doing after this?
Yeah. And I guess they're, what was the Russian dissenters, radical pacifism. Okay. So and you know, they had these certain beliefs. They did not want their kids to go to school. The government forced their kids to go to school. And in protest, the people burned down their own homes, right? And stand naked outside the homes. I mean, talk about flipping the script.
That's great that you found it.
Yeah, yeah. So, so do you think Jim would have researched that and known about that, or how do you think we landed?
I'm guessing he found it. He found the photograph in a magazine or a book.
Huh.
Yeah. I mean, the internet was around then, but it wasn't like the internet now.
Of course. Yeah. But to me,
I mean, is it credited in here?
Oh, no, I looked up that guy's name, George Diak. Was it? Okay, yeah, it is. Front cover photo, George Diak. But I saw it on Discogs, and I just copy and pasted his name, and I ended up finding this. But something about it I think is great for me, that it does seem kind of Jim Shepard, you know, like you don't want the
it does.
Because she doesn't want the kids to go to school, she burns down her own house. Like, just a form of protest that would just completely
like what are you doing? Yeah. Like, not burning down the school.
Yeah. It like would completely derail any sort of attack, you know, like, I mean,
yeah,
I don't know. It's I don't know. I found this rather fascinating. Okay. Yeah, as we mentioned, so it's just a three-piece on here, right? You got Jim, you got Leland
Yeah.
Kane playing bass, and you have three different drummers, right? Depending on which track. Okay. Everything written by Jim. Oh yeah, there you go. Cover photo, George Dioc. Oh, the original title of this album was Harvard Zombie Meat. That's mentioned in here too. Educated people without a clue. Recorded. Do you know this? Is this in Columbus? Dead Cat in Stone Basement Studio.
That's probably his basement, I'm guessing. Yeah, that's not a real. Yeah, that's not a real studio.
Okay. I just yeah, and just some
yeah.
Go ahead.
No, it's like, I mean, it's a home studio is what that is. Yeah.
I always
it's
like
not a charge by the hour studio.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great picture.
Photo of him. And when I was putting that piece together 10 years ago already. Yeah, Charles. How do I pronounce his last name? Cicerella?
Cicerella? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Charles sent me this photo, which I had not seen at the time, but now seems to be somewhat well known. But yeah, Charles let me use this photo for my piece, which I thought was
yeah, and that photo is the Ever Never record cover, I believe.
Yeah, it's one of the covers. I don't know if it's the front cover, but it's included in.
It's somewhere in here. I don't know where.
Rusty Stone Rock is the photographer on this. How is that Ever Never release?
It's good. It's good. It's got a nice booklet. Tom Lax writes the liner notes. It's done extremely well.
Okay. Just looking at the track listing, I'm surprised at the number of covers on there. Right? Are they?
Yeah, I think, and there's live stuff. I don't know how much involvement Gabe had with that. So I don't know if these were songs that were from tapes that have been passed around. So that would be a question for the folks that put it together.
And here's your comic book, which I thoroughly enjoyed.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah. When did this come out?
I think about 4 years ago. I don't know. I don't quite remember.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah, I did a comic about the Ramones, a story involving me and the Ramones, which came out like I wrote it. It was in my blog, and the Ramones one was like 3 different sections, and I don't know if I said this in the Guided by Voices episode, but basically what happened was I got a message from Steve Turner from Mudhoney. Sent me a note. It was just like, that Ramones story is hilarious. That should be a comic. And so Nick's Comics, which is here in Columbus, said, let's do it. So this guy, Andy Bennett, who's a really good artist, did the art for the Ramones, and it did really well. I think it went into like, I don't know how many different pressings, a lot. And so Ken Epstein said, let's do another one. What do you want to do? And I said, I want to do something about Jim. And the comic basically is, most of the writing is from my blog about something I wrote about Jim. And that whatever I wrote has been shared a lot. Like if you go to Jim Shepard, if you Google Jim Shepard and read stuff, there's usually a link to what I wrote about him. So I just wanted, he was such a special guy that I wanted to sort of capture him, but as somebody who knew him fairly well but didn't really know him. So that's where that came from. And as far as I know, and I think it's out of print. He's repressed it, or republished it, or reprinted it a couple times, but I don't think there's any plans to redo it, unless we do a collection of there's 3 different comics. So yeah,
The book
it doesn't tell his story. It's not his. It's like snippets of his life.
Well, that what I felt that was consistent with his music. Like I always get these really, well, even in something like these vertical slit albums, which is a lot of experimental stuff, but then you'll get this like song that's just kind of crystal clear with all this kind of information about his worldview suddenly, and then
and I think that the design of the book and the art of the comic was intentionally reflected in that.
That I felt that.
Andy did a great job putting it together.
So this band here, who would this be?
I believe that is the scene where he is at CBGB's playing with the Turks. So that's Eric Davidson, Jim Weber in the middle, and Sam Brown, who ended up playing for V3.
Okay.
So I don't know if the picture depicts exactly what happened. I was not at that show. So that's where this comes from. I think that panel is from the page where he played with the Turks, or with Eric.
Okay, so I thought we just mentioned your upcoming release, right, on the way out, right? Love, Death, and Photosynthesis, right? We're all looking forward to this. What can we expect? You don't need to talk about this stuff.
The book, the book is about mostly Jerry Wick, who's in Gone, Jenny May, and myself, and a lot has to do. I mean, there's a ton of music in it, but I don't think it's a music book. I think it's really about friendship and living and dying with substance abuse to mental illness and surviving all of that. So it comes out August 6th. And it is going to be so if anybody's listening in the UK, it will be out in the UK. So Don Giovanni, which is primarily a record label, they have a small press, so they're putting it out. So I hope people buy it, and more importantly, I hope the people that read it resonates with them.
When you say it's not especially a music book, you think people could enjoy it if they don't know anything about the Columbus?
Yeah, I do. Music is the scenery of it, but the characters are the story. So, like people who love Guided by Voices, like Guided by Voices heads may want to read it for the Guided by Voices story, but that is secondary to the other parts of it. It's not a memoir in a way. I don't know. I mean, there's a couple books like people have talked about. There's a couple reviews that have talked about Just Kids, the Patti Smith book. Our Band Could Be Your Life, and 2 reviews have talked about On the Road. So it's much more of a sort of stream of conscious, I guess. Cool. So yeah, it's not. I mean, there's music on every page, but it's not. It's a descriptor.
Wow.
I guess. I think the music is more to describe emotion than anything.
Wow. I'm looking forward to it. Does Jim appear in this?
Yeah. Okay. So he's got his own chapter.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
Yeah. He's got a nice, there's a nice picture of him too. Yeah. So there's there's paperback and there was a hardcover edition, but thankfully it's sold out. So
Wow.
so we're hoping it does well.
Okay. Okay. Well, Bela, thanks for talking today. Yeah, it was a treat for me. Like, as I said, I've been a fan of Jim Shepard's for years, but I haven't had an opportunity to really talk to people about it. So
Thanks for having me. It's always, I love to talk, as you know.
And would love to have you back in the future to talk about other artists from Columbus and otherwise anywhere. Right.
More than happy, but thank you. And hopefully with next time you're in Ohio, we can meet in person.
Yeah. I usually go down to Columbus because my sister lives there. So
oh, good. Yeah. Super.
Okay, so you said you wanted to go out with Bristol Girl, right? Track 2. So why Bristol Girl?
Well, I think it's my favorite song of Jim's. It's also like, it's not indicative of his sound necessarily, and it's a really soft sounding song, but like you mentioned, it's got some pretty harsh lyrics as well. I mean, I think it captures his feelings of isolation, but I just think it's a gorgeous song. I mean, it's one of the best songs of the 90s. So yeah.
But again, even within this song, I see that conflict, right? Because it's like clearly a beautiful song, but I think the lyrics are so kind of complex and
and there's that tug too, right? Of like, he wants her affection, but there's reasons not to like her first. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Like, I'm going to reject you before you reject me.
Yeah, it's again that same inner conflict that I see on Star Artist and elsewhere. Yeah, like just that Shepard mentality. Okay, so we'll go out with Bristol Girl. All right. Thanks for watching and listening. That's been episode 33. Okay, let's check out Bristol Girl. Thanks, Bela.
Thank you, David. I appreciate it.
London girl always giving you crap about this and that, find another human that will put up with you. Find another human. Pakistani girl done gave you crap about this and that. That Chinese girl won't share her cakes and rice with you. Wish she knew. You just need a human that will put up with you. You need to find another human. a human.
Yeah, pretty good for a basement recording, huh?
Yeah, it's a pretty incredible song. Yeah.